C8. Come on, you want a piece of hot dog? Come and get some. You're scared? You don't want to get gapped? This is nice. Nice. Very nice. Come on. Implied. Still doesn't want a piece of it.
Good afternoon, guys. Welcome back to Horsepower Obsessed. My name is Justin. Today we're going to talk about the C8 Corvette and why some of the past engineers over at GM don't necessarily think it's a great idea for GM to be going mid-engine with this Corvette. Alright guys, so Jim Mero, who used to work at GM as kind of a suspension engineer, has recently come out and spoke publicly about the C8 Corvette and why he worries about it. Now, for any of you who don't know, Jim Mero recently also talked publicly about the C7 Corvette and its lap times around the Nürburgring. So like I said, he worked at GM as a suspension engineer and got to actually test some of these cars, drive them professionally on the Nürburgring and other tracks just to get what kind of times they would put down, etc. He obviously knows his stuff. He's been with the company for a long time and has only recently stepped away, so he still has a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience working with specifically the C8 Corvette. He was still with GM when they were deciding to make this car mid-engine, and he didn't really think that that was necessarily the best course of action for GM or for the Corvette. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there who did not want the Corvette to go mid-engine, would have much rather it just stay front engine, rear drive. But like I've said in my previous videos, I'm all for evolution. And if the Corvette has to go mid-engine to get better performance, better traction, whatever it might be, then I'm all for it. The Corvette has always been the pinnacle of performance for American-made cars, and this is not going to be any exception. I'm sure the car is going to come out and it's going to blow us all away with its performance. I'm just hoping it does the same for its looks. Now, some of the things that Jim Mero talked about in his most recent interview were concerning for sure. Now, like I said, I'm just a guy who can appreciate Corvettes, and I would like to assume that GM's got this all on lockdown. But when Jim Mero speaks about certain suspension things, certain parts of the car he doesn't necessarily agree with, I am a little worried myself. He actually started out the interview by saying, quote unquote, "I worry about the mid-engine Corvette." That by itself is obviously pretty worrisome for anybody who is excited about this car, because someone who literally worked on it isn't sold on it. Now, at this point, we are less than a month away from the official reveal of the C8 Corvette, and it seems like some people aren't 100% sold on the fact that it should have gone mid-engine. Now, Jim Mero obviously had a lot to do with the production of the C7 Corvette, and he stated that GM actually went out and rented a couple different supercars to test the C7 Corvette against before we ever even saw the C7 Corvette. So GM specifically rented a few Ferraris, a few different Lamborghinis, and even some Porsches. And Mero goes on to say that the C7 was able to smoke all of them. Now, of course, we already know what the C7 Corvette's performance is like. It's fantastic. It's a great car. It literally gives you supercar performance at normal car prices. We already know that. But having somebody from GM who has all of this engineering capability state it really just makes it clear for us. The biggest reason that's important is because since GM was benchmarking the C7 against such high-end supercars, Jim Mero isn't convinced that the move to mid-engine is necessarily the right move with the C8, because the C7 Corvette already had performance that was supercar. Now, I know this video is going to be met with a lot of anger and a lot of hate, because it sounds like I'm saying the C8 should not go mid-engine, but that's not what I'm saying here. What I am saying is Jim Mero is basically saying he doesn't think it should go mid-engine, or that it necessarily needs to. If this was just a word of the random Corvette lover, then I could understand a lot of people disagreeing and going about their business. But this particular person actually worked on these cars. He actually knows everything about them, and he's saying he's not sure it should go this way. One of Mero's biggest complaints about the car going mid-engine is one, of course, I've heard a bunch of different times, and that is cargo space or storage space. The C7 Corvette actually has a lot of both of these for such a high-end sports car, or if you want to call it supercar. He's concerned the C8 Corvette won't have the same amount of cargo space because typically mid-engine cars don't. And while I personally don't necessarily care that much about the cargo space or storage space, it is nice to have, but I'll take performance over that any day. Mero does go on to say that the C8 Corvette will be able to fit your full-size golf bag, but not much else. Mero has been retired from GM for a few years now, but he said that the C8 engineers will likely need to, quote-unquote, reinvent the wheel to try to perfect the car's build. GM is basically moving into uncharted territory with the C8 Corvette, and they're really going to have to pretty much start over. The C7 Corvette was really just a perfection of the front engine rear drive layout that they've been using for years now. So it wasn't necessarily a complete redo. With the mid-engine Corvette, they are literally going to have to start from scratch, build that thing up, and then perfect it as the years come, just like they did with the front engine rear drive car. Mero goes on to say that the mid-engine car will not offer a perfect weight distribution similar to how the C7 currently does, and understeer is going to be a hard problem to fix. Like I said, this is coming from someone who's spent a lot of time in a Corvette on a track, so he knows a thing or two about it, and he knows exactly how these cars behave when pushed to the limits. Jim literally said straight up the mid-engine car wasn't likely necessary to achieve GM's performance goals for the new Corvette. But he also said, of course, it's going to be crazy popular because it's a new Corvette. Once it comes out, people are going to flock to it and they're going to buy it, but it doesn't necessarily mean GM had to do this. Like I said, we're getting very close to that July 18th reveal date, so we're going to find out very soon whether or not this was something that definitely had to happen, or if it's even something that people are going to like. I have my fingers crossed for a couple different things. I'm really hoping we get a car that looks amazing, considering the C7 Corvette was just a home run, and honestly, anything less than that is going to be a disappointment at this point. I'd also like to see a manual version of this car, but like I've stated in 100 of my other videos, I'm not going to hold my breath. Now, because of all the publicity that this particular interview got from Jim Mero, he actually came out and gave an update. He responded to some of the comments that he's gotten about the worried statement he used earlier in his interview. He basically clarified a couple different things by saying that he should have used a better word than worried, but the reason he gave that example was because every mid-engine car he has driven except for the C8 had problems or had him worried about how the car would perform. He did, in fact, tell his boss that they were going to have to reinvent the wheel to do it better than those other guys, but he never meant to say that they didn't with the C8. He also goes on to clarify with the C7 beating most of, if not all, mid-engine cars with comparable weight and horsepower it was pitted against, but again saying that he never referred to the fact that the C8 didn't do the same. So ultimately what he's doing here is basically saying didn't necessarily need to go mid-engine, but at the same time, it's not going to necessarily perform worse than the C7 Corvette. He actually said earlier in this particular response that in his mind, every generation of the Corvette was better than the generation before, and the C8 will be no different. I, for one, actually fully appreciate the fact that Jim Mero would go out of his way to clarify some of these comments, just so anybody reading doesn't necessarily automatically discount them as a disgruntled previous employee. I do believe Jim Mero has a lot of knowledge on this fact and a lot of great insight, considering he has worked on the C7 and the C8, and he actually got to put the C7 through a lot of its paces on the Nürburgring, which of course the C7 put down some amazing numbers out there. So I can only imagine how much better the C8 is going to do if he's in fact saying, of course, the C8 will be better than the previous generation C7. I fully understand what he's trying to say here. When you boil it right down to the actual point, he's basically just saying the C8 did not have to go mid-engine to increase performance past the C7 Corvette, but he's not saying that going mid-engine is going to be a bad thing either. Anytime a car manufacturer changes something this major, there's always going to be concerns, there's always going to be growing pains, but I have a real good feeling GM is going to do it right. They're going to get this car out to us and it's going to be a fantastic performer. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. So if you liked what you saw, give me a big thumbs up. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them in the comment section down below or send me an email, horse.power.obsessed@gmail.com. I'd be glad to hear from you. If you have not subscribed yet, please do. I'd love to have you as part of the Horsepower Obsessed community. And as always, guys, I'll catch you in the next one.